Sheva, Israel National TV, and Or Olam, the Center for Biblical Zionism, present Ari Abramowitz and Jeremy Gimpel. Live from the heart of Israel, welcome to Tuesday Night Live in Jerusalem.
Shalom, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday Night Live in Jerusalem. So, a couple days ago, I find myself at the wedding of two beautiful, holy, incredible, very special Jews on the peak of Mount Scopus in Jerusalem. Now, Mount Scopus, it overlooks the beautiful rolling hills, the old city, the Temple Mount. It was breathtaking. Now, the bride, her father, was the rabbi who was officiating the wedding. So as you can imagine, he was fighting off tears, he was getting choked up, everyone was getting choked up, the bride's sisters were bawling. I mean, how could they not? Their father was officiating the wedding of their sister. It was really touching, it was so beautiful. But the groom, he's what this whole presentation is about in my mind, because he's such a special guy. I met him a couple years ago when he was here in Israel visiting from his home in Thailand. Now, by his own admission, he was a relatively secular, disconnected, assimilated Jew. And never in his life would he think that he would end up marrying a girl here in Jerusalem, making his life here, but there we were at his wedding. But what was so noteworthy about this wedding were the groom's parents. You see, his religious wedding, the religious ceremony with the chuppah, with the kittel, the white robe he was wearing, was just as foreign to them as the religious lifestyle that he decided to take on himself. I spoke to his brother beforehand, and his brother said, you know, I was warned about these religious weddings. You know, I don't really know what to expect. I heard that the guys dance in circles with the guys, the girls dance in circles with the girls. The whole thing sounds a little strange to me. I said, it's going to be the best wedding you've ever been at in your entire life. But let me just give you one piece of advice. Go and pick your brother up on your shoulders. You see, his brother is a dominant, strong, massive guy, and he said, I don't know, you know, I have a hernia, I ripped it open, I don't know if I can do that. I said, oh please, you'll be fine, it'll be great, you rip it open, we'll just stuff the intestines back in, sew it up, just do what you gotta do. So, we're waiting for them to come out, and finally, the bride and the groom come out, and there's an explosion of energy. People are dancing, people are singing, people are juggling, flips. It's incredible, and in swoops in the groom's little brother, and with superhuman strength hoists his brother on his shoulders and dances with him for 5 minutes. It was a feat that I could not ever believe. Now, it was such a special wedding. There was so much fun. And I was thinking, how am I going to make the bride and the groom smile and laugh? Because it's a mitzvah to bring happiness to the bride and the groom on their wedding day. So I was thinking about doing my patented belly flop. I've done this before. I go and I jump up in the air and I land flat on my face. And although it does hurt, it's really funny, it gets laughs, but the last time I did it, my shoulder hit the ground first. And I couldn't move. I was actually dragged off the dance floor. So I nixed that, and I was thinking plan B is always to take a big vase of water and go offer it to them and then just dump it over my head. But the chances of an elder of the wedding slipping, breaking a hip, it just wasn't worth it. So I thought maybe Jeremy wasn't there. I'll steal his shtick, his trick. What does he do? He goes to the table, grabs the flowers, shoves them into his mouth, eats them. And I was going to do that. I was looking at the flowers, I was weighing the options, but my gag reflex is so sensitive that I couldn't take the risk of throwing up my freshly eaten egg rolls all over the bride. So I just decided this wedding, I was going to take the normal route, be a normal person, and just dance and have fun, because the last thing that this wedding was lacking was happiness and fun. But like so many weddings here in Jerusalem, I always feel a little twinge of pain. Pain for the other half. The other half of Jews that are so disconnected and so assimilated that they don't understand the gravity of the error that they're making by marrying out of the Jewish nation. They don't understand what a terrible thing it is to sever the link between their ancestors and their descendants. I always think of this fellow I met in Texas. He was telling me that he was planning a wedding of his own with his non-Jewish girlfriend, but he was waiting for his grandmother to die. Now, I know it sounds terrible. It sounds terrible to me, but really I think it was coming from a good place because she was old and she was sick and he didn't want to break her heart. And I said to him, but doesn't it hurt you? Don't you feel guilty? And he said, why would I possibly feel guilty? I went every now and then to a Reconstructionist temple growing up. It was anything but spiritual. It was like a country club. He said it was like keeping up with the Goldbergs. Everybody was comparing everything else with each other. He said the rabbi didn't even believe in God. His parents, his grandparents never really stressed the importance of marrying a Jew. And now that he falls in love, now because of some nostalgic sense of guilt that his grandmother has, he can't be with the girl he loves. You know, what was I going to say? No, that's not the whole story. That's not really Judaism. To him, that was the whole story. To him, that really was Judaism.
So what do you do with that? There's a Jewish guy, a non-Jewish girl. He loves her, and she loves him. What do you say to them? Well, it's such a challenge. And tonight, we have a Jewish leader that's going to help tackle this issue. He's the director of Isralight. He's one of the most powerful and inspiring teachers in Jerusalem. His name is Rabbi Binny Freedman. When discussing how to combat assimilation, and when people ask me, why is it important to be Jewish? Why be Jewish? What's so special about the Jewish people? I feel though a non-Jew says it better than anyone. My mother gave this to me when I graduated high school, written by Mark Twain, a non-Jew in America. Harper's Magazine in 1899 asked Mark Twain to write an article about the Jewish people. Asked him, could you do this without any bias? And he said, I believe I can. This was in 1899, and this is what he wrote. If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. It suggests a nebulous dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly be heard of, but he is heard of. He has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance extravagantly outproportioned to the smallness of his bulk. His contributions to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and obtuse learning are also way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made marvelous fight in this world in all the ages, and he has done this with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, and faded into dream stuff and passed away. The Greeks and the Romans followed and made their vast noise, and they are now gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now or have vanished. The Jew saw them all and beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? Why be Jewish? Because it's magnificent to be Jewish. Because it's special and wondrous. We're all a part of the eternal nation of Israel, and we're all a part of the majesty and greatness of Jewish destiny. Tonight, we want to call on all of our brothers and sisters around the world and say, keep the flame of Judaism burning bright. Our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers sacrificed so much for us to be here today. Our lives in Israel are the living dreams and hopes of centuries upon centuries, generations upon generations. If there was ever a time to join the Jewish people on this marvelous journey, it would be today. Don't break the link of our heritage. And if Judaism doesn't mean much to you, come to Israel and find out more about who you are. You don't owe it just to your ancestors. You owe it to yourself, because you're a part of the most amazing people that has ever existed on the face of the planet. But for now, we want you to meet the streets of Jerusalem. We want you to hear what the Jews of Jerusalem have to say about being Jewish, about staying Jewish, because Ari and I want you to meet the street.
And now meet the street with Ari and Jeremy.
So what's the best way you think to fight assimilation?
Marry a Jew.
Judaism is like right. So I think that by the time you get married, you should like know and like be like solid enough with your religion to like know that it's right, and therefore why would you want to marry anybody else except for a Jew?
Judaism is life, and if you marry outside of Judaism, that's already giving up who you are and that your identity. And when you marry, you're marrying like in your identity. You can't marry outside of who you are.
I think it's important that that we recognize that we're not just like all other people, and that we continue our faith within ourselves, and you can't fulfill your purpose of what you're supposed to do here if you're not doing it with the people that you were given to do it with.
For thousands of years, we've been the one nation. When every other ancient civilization has fallen, the Jews have been the one people that managed to stay together. And I think an important part of doing that is maintaining, the central core family belief, because, once you have a Jewish person and a Catholic person marrying, and you're saying to your kid, you could be Jewish, you could be Catholic, and, you're taking away the fact that this isn't something we're necessarily given as a choice. We were born Jewish, and it's just something that, we have to accept and, live our life based on. So you just have to show, people like your family, that this is what's important.
Would you ever marry a non-Jew?
No.
No,
I don't think so.
Not even Brad Pitt?
No.
Doogie Howser?
No.
John Candy?
Nope.
I respect your resolve on the issue.
If we're going to preserve our identity, we have to do it.
It's a feeling that I need Jewish because I'm Jewish and it's something connected to my soul.
Voulez-vous croissant?
Croissant?
Croissant.
Pourquoi croissant?
Chevrolet?
Chevrolet?
Soupe du jour?
C'est quoi ça?
Ah, croissant.
C'est quoi ça?
Perrier.
C'est quoi?
Perrier. Ah, croissant.
Oui.
Croissant.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Merci.
Merci. So what do you think the best way to fight assimilation is?
First of all, live in a Jewish society. Second of all, come to Israel. What do you got to look for in Golis? You're a Jew, you're born in Israel, come back to Israel.
What's fun to be Jewish?
Because we get a state in Israel, and you get to be with all these other Jews.
Would you marry only Jewish?
Yeah.
Why? Why would you only marry Jewish?
Well, I feel proud to be a Jew, and I want my kids to be Jewish.
Do you love being Jewish?
Yes.
Would you like to marry a Jewish man?
Of course.
Why was it important for you to marry a Jewish man?
Because I'm Jewish.
And so what does that mean? Why is it important to have Jewish children?
Yes.
And what would you want to teach them?
Jewish things.
Are you Jewish?
Yeah, sure.
Do you like being Jewish?
Sure.
Do you want to marry a Jewish woman?
Sure.
Why?
Because I'm Jew, and to be Jewish, I can't speak in English. God bless you.
Every other religion, no matter how strong they are, they've always been wiped out. So I think Judaism is really just like life. You know what I'm saying? What she said before, it's life. It's everlasting. It's it's insurance that you have it in with the master of the universe.
We have to fulfill and become closer to God as much as we can every single day with everything that we do.
We keep going on. You know what I'm saying? And I think that's what it is. It's like God's on our side, and we know what we're doing, and we're united in a way that no other nation is.
What do you think is the secret to our survival?
I gotta say perseverance.
I think it's joy. I think Jewish people, when they come together to celebrate Chagim and weddings, I think there's a lot of joy. I think that's the secret.
What do you think is the secret to Jewish survival?
Jewish mothers. Honestly, Jewish mothers are the one who transfer everything down to their children and to their children, and they're the one that keeps the house kosher. They're the one that keeps the Jewish theme alive and the love for the Jewish religion and the minhagim that the Jewish people carry, and that's what brought us through.
What do you have to say about that?
She's sleeping.
If you're proud to be a Jewish person, I think that'll come through to your children, and I think in any place where they are, any place in the world they find themselves, they will act as Jews, they'll be proud of their heritage, they'll pass their heritage down to their children.
Are you Jewish?
No.
So what is your favorite thing about the Jewish people?
Their love, their heart, they're just
the most magnificent people we've ever met.
What would you do if all of the Jewish people disappeared?
We wouldn't exist. We wouldn't make it. We couldn't survive without you.
So why do you think it's so important that the Jewish people exist?
Because you are God's #1 group in His redemptive plan, and if you're not there, we're not there.
What do you think is the secret to Jewish survival?
That's the will, the power, the illusion.
The illusion. Well, I mean, for 2,000 years, the Jewish people were scattered among the nations. The last stop we really had was in Germany, where Germans killed 6 million Jews. What's it like to be from Germany and see the state of Israel and Jerusalem, a Jewish state? Does that make you happy that we were able to exist?
I admire. I worked for 30 years for Israeli company. So
wow, for Israeli company.
Yeah.
So you love the Jewish people?
Very much.
Where are you from?
Oh, I'm from Ethiopia.
From Ethiopia?
Yes.
Are you Jewish?
No, I am the Christianity people.
You're a Christian?
Yes.
Do you love the Jewish people?
Yes, I love the Jewish people.
I love Jewish people because they are the people that are God's chosen ones. They are the people who directed me to the Torah. I knew nothing about the Torah. They are the people that taught me how to love, how to deal with life, and to love the state of Israel.
Walk on this land, take this land, cultivate this land, produce it, do what you're supposed to do. Obey His commandments and be strong.
Do you speak English? أنا من جامعة القدس. من فين أنت؟
أنا من القدس برضه.
القدس؟ السلام عليكم.
عليكم السلام ورحمة الله.
فلافل شاورما.
Shalom and welcome back to Tuesday Night Live in Jerusalem. Now for the heart of the evening. We have Rabbi Binny Friedman with us tonight, the director of Isralight in the Old City, the Rosh Yeshiva of Yeshivat Oraita, one of the most inspirational speakers I've ever met and one of the greatest storytellers I've ever heard. So tonight, please give a warm welcome to Rabbi Binny Friedman. Rabbi, thank you so much for being with us tonight. The question I guess we'll start off with is, how big of a problem is assimilation? Is it as big as we think? Are we really going down the drain?
Okay, it's good to be here. No, I'm just kidding. Serious question. How big is the problem of assimilation? Well, in order to talk about how big the problem is, I guess first we have to define what the problem is. Most people think that assimilation is the problem. Assimilation is not the problem. Assimilation is a symptom. It's caused by the problem, and the problem is education. One could suggest that the reason that people have such a hard time falling in love with being Jewish because their education and the Judaism that they view Judaism as being is just not something worth falling in love with. And I'll give you a quick example. Okay? I do a lot of flying, and there's certain aspects of flying that you get used to, and you can tell when they happen who the veteran flyers are. So a friend of mine recently sent me an email, and he was on a plane, and they have this, I don't know quite how to describe it, it's called wind shear. Wind shear basically means that your plane is flying along, everything is normal, and at some point, for some inexplicable reason, the plane takes a nosedive, hits some kind of wind, something, they don't really know what this is. And if you're on a plane and you've experienced wind shear and the plane is flying down, 1,000 feet a second, you get a little nervous. So this fellow's on a plane and the pilot's doing his thing, right? The pilot gets on, he's got to make his announcements, everybody knows he's there. You'll be flying over Kansas, you'll see the Rocky Mountains, whatever it might be, and he's in the middle of this speech, and they hit this incredible wind shear. And the plane takes a nosedive, okay? And the pilot doesn't realize that his microphone is still on. And you hear over the microphone, holy, I don't know who's going to see this, holy bagel, okay? Now, if you're on a plane and the pilot, who's calm a moment ago, all of a sudden screams out, "Holy bagel!" you get nervous. So you right away see who the newbies are. They're all assuming the position. And then a moment later, you know, things calm down, and he suddenly realizes that he left the microphone on. So he gets back on the microphone and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, in no time were you in any danger. We just hit wind shear. We're fine. It was just that I'd just been given a hot cup of coffee. You should see my pants." At which point, somebody from the back stands up and screams, "You should see mine!" Right? The problem is all about perspective. It depends where you're sitting on the plane. And we need to find a way to share a Judaism that's worth sharing. So now you ask me how big the problem is. Just as an example, we've begun a program at Isralight. It's called Oraita. It's a one-year program post-high school. And as a result, I've been visiting high schools here in Israel and especially in America. I have yet to find a Jewish high school that doesn't have a significant number of students who have spent the better part of their youth studying Judaism who are not completely disaffected. And if we don't find a way to communicate a Judaism that's empowering, that's relevant, that's inspirational, then the overwhelming majority of the next generation will have no interest in being Jewish. That's the challenge.
So we're wondering then, what's the way? Like, what is your approach to solving this problem?
Okay, I think probably one of the challenges, you know, Rav Kook, who was the first chief rabbi of Israel before it was a state, believed that everything comes into the world for a reason and that there's beauty and sanctity to everything. So somebody once asked him, well, if everything is holy, what's holy about atheism? Like, why do we need atheism? So Rav Kook suggested that the atheist comes to teach the world something. Because what is the atheist basically saying? He's saying that if this is the God that you would have me believe in, then I'm not interested, because God has to be better than that. And the truth is that the atheist is right. God is better than that. In fact, the God that the atheist isn't interested in, I'm not interested in either. I just think that that's not really what God is all about. I think the same is true about Judaism. We need to share a Judaism that's much more beautiful and much more inspirational. And I emphasize the word share. Look, if Judaism is that beautiful, if Israel is that magnificent, you shouldn't have to be convincing or proving to anybody what Judaism is. You should just be able to share it with them. In fact, it's like a chocolate bar. You know, there are certain things that were put in this world because God did us a favor. Hershey's Symphony chocolate bar. I don't know if I'm in trouble for mentioning a name. Imagine that you want to share with someone just how incredible chocolate is, but he's never tasted chocolate. So you can talk about chocolate till you're blue in the face. Until he experiences a chocolate bar, he's not going to get it. And once he tastes it, he gets it. So I think ultimately the challenge is how we share the experience of what Judaism is all about with more and more Jews. And that's a step in the right direction.
So how do we do that? What do we do to let them experience what authentic Judaism is?
Okay, well, first of all, I think you all have to come visit Israel. And I think you should come now. We're waiting for you. That's first of all. Second of all, I think that that those of us who love being Jewish and find Judaism relevant have to learn how to share it. And I don't think we do a good enough job at that, you know? And third of all, I think that there are so many, I mean, look, we're a blessed generation. For 2,000 years, we've been wandering the face of the globe. And today you can get on a plane, and I guess the people in this audience know that, and for $9.99, you can walk in the whole city of Jerusalem. You can stand in the Golan Heights, in the Valley of Tears, and witness a place where the Jewish state survived, where one battalion held off entire brigades of Syrian tanks in 1973. You can stand on the Kinneret. I mean, wherever it is. And, well, you can't stand on the Kinneret. That was done, and, you know, that's different. But, Lake Kinneret. But I think the first challenge is that we have to empower people and share with people and offer people the opportunity to come. Once people come here, there's such a plethora of opportunities. I also think, by the way, that the internet and the web, and we could get going, use up our time. So
how could the average person go and share this knowledge without seeming like a missionary? What should they give out books? What would you recommend as far as?
You know, one of the interesting challenges. We once had a student at Isralight, and we were doing one of our retreats, plug, and we were sort of, you know, going around this circle, a whole bunch of students of every Jewish variety you can imagine, and this girl was sharing sort of what she got out of this Shabbat experience. And she said that she had been in a very traditional high school in Brooklyn somewhere, doesn't matter what it was called, And she was describing to us sort of at what point she really took a turn in a different direction. She came to, the school in the morning, and they had a traditional prayer service, what they call davening, and she was just not into it. It wasn't her thing. But she was there, and she was respectful, and she was standing there, and she had the prayer book open, the Siddur, and one of the teachers came over to her and said, I don't know, we'll call her Rachel. You're not davening, you're not praying. So she said, well, I'm here. I'm not davening. I don't really get it, but I'm here. So the teacher says to her, well, you have to daven. So the girl says, well, you can't make us daven. You can't force us to do this. So the teacher says, no, that's not true. This is part of the curriculum, and we expect you to be respectful. So the girl says, well, I am being respectful. I'm here. I'm holding the prayer book. I'm not bothering anybody. But you can't force me to pray. So the teacher says, yes, we can. This is part of the curriculum. And if you don't do the prayer thing, right, then we'll ask you to leave the school. So of course the girl said, well, you can't force me to pray. So they expelled her. Now you got to think about this for a minute. What's the issue here? First of all, this girl is probably the smartest girl in the room, because she's recognizing that she's involved in something that doesn't make sense to her and that troubles her. But the real challenge here is the teacher. Because you can't blame the teacher, because I think possibly at the root of that dialogue was the fact that the teacher had no viable way to explain why this girl could find prayer to be a meaningful experience. Right? I mean, most people walk into a synagogue and they assume, at best, that the goal of being in the synagogue is to ask God for a whole shopping list of things. Let's assume for the moment that you're in a synagogue because you really want to ask God for something that you find meaningful. Somebody's sick and you want them to get better. But then you stop to think about it. Well, you have to go to synagogue to ask God to make somebody better? Doesn't God know what you want? In fact, who made the person sick to begin with? God! So you really should wake up in the morning and say, listen, God, I don't know what you're doing, but whatever it is, keep up the good work, and that'll be done. Be the shortest service in history. Everybody would love it. So what's the point? I think what we need to do is to begin to ask ourselves honestly, well, so what are our questions? Why is it that we're not inspired about what we do? You can't share something as inspirational until you find it inspirational. And the question is, how much do we really want that? How important is that to us, right? So that's at least the beginning.
So if someone is now being challenged, they're thinking of intermarrying, they have a child that's thinking about they're just disenchanted with Judaism, what would you recommend they do?
Okay, well, obviously that's a question that very much depends on the specifics of the case, but I'll give you just as a broad perspective. I think very often the challenge is that we know the implications of the choices we're making, that we understand what it is we're giving up. I've met people very often, and I think, by the way, part of the challenge here also is that very often when we're trying to communicate sort of messages along this line, people find that to be very judgmental. Imagine if you're sitting with a couple, and this was your example from before. She's Catholic and he's Jewish, and somehow they got in front of the rabbi, right? And you're trying to say something to them. What is it you're trying to do? What's your goal? So in my perspective, I just want to know that the people that I'm sitting with at least understand what it is that they're giving up, right? And that's a very big question. What is it that they're giving up? Do they care that they're giving it up, right? Very often someone will say, well, we'll give our child a choice. They'll get more for the same buck. They can learn about Catholicism, they can learn about Judaism, right? And that's, of course, very difficult, because it's difficult enough to bring a child up as a Jewish child if you have two Jewish parents. If they're getting a mixture of both, are they really getting either? So the dialogue really is about what it is that you have to offer and what it is that they're giving up. But I think on a deeper level, I think that people become impacted in these discussions because they feel that they've met someone who sees something that they haven't quite seen. And that's a very difficult question. In fact, we have time for an example?
Yes.
I'll give you a quick example. I once get a call. I was, it doesn't matter, I was in a conference, and I kept getting messages from this fellow. I didn't know who he was, and I just didn't have the time to return the phone call. But 10 messages in one day. So I finally managed to call this fellow back, and didn't know who he was. I thought maybe somebody I knew. I didn't remember. So we get on the phone. I said, hello, I'm Binny Friedman. Can I help you? So the guy on the other end of the phone says, well, I am told you are the one to stop an intermarriage. I don't know if that's true, but fine. So we get into this discussion, and it turns out that his son is seeing this non-Jewish girl, and that's an interesting question, whether that's really my speed, but okay. So I said to him, well, look, I don't know your son, I don't know the girl, I don't know you, but I'm always happy to talk to anybody. How serious is this? So he says, well, they're engaged. I said, okay, well, when are they getting married? He says, in 2 weeks. I said, okay. So I said, look, I'm happy to meet with them. I'll meet anybody, but I don't know that I'm going to, but okay. So, of course, go get a guy who's 2 weeks before his wedding to meet the rabbi, right? Turned out that this father was not planning on attending the wedding. Put aside for the moment whether that's right or wrong. It's a very difficult question, a lot of pain involved. So I said to the father, listen, I'll tell you what. I don't know this fellow. I don't know if he'll come to see me. I don't know if we'll get together. But you got to be willing to give something up. So I'll tell you what. I'll tell your son on the phone that if he agrees to meet with me, you'll go to the wedding. Are you willing to do that? So this guy, after some cajoling, agreed, and that's what we did. So we got together for an evening, and we were on the west side of Manhattan, and we have this whole discussion, and we ended up in a synagogue. And the whole discussion was not about whether I thought, it had nothing to do with the girl. I'm sure the girl was a wonderful girl, and this was a really fine fellow. And his question, of course, well, why shouldn't I marry somebody who's not Jewish? Nobody ever gave me a reason to love being Jewish to begin with. So we get into this whole discussion, and we end up in a synagogue. And I had arranged in this particular synagogue, which shall go nameless, or I'll never be invited there again, but I arranged for the main sanctuary to be open. I know the people in the synagogue. And I arranged for the ark to be open. Okay? And we go into the synagogue, and I can't believe I'm saying this, and this is being recorded, but we go into the synagogue, and we have this whole discussion, and I said to him, listen, I know that your father's giving you a tough time, and you strike me as a really, beautiful guy, and the implications of what you're doing are so significant, and I don't think you should break off the relationship. I just think, you have to ask yourself whether you're really ready to get married and you know what you're giving up. So give yourself a little test, There's a Torah scroll in there. You grew up as a Jew. Everybody knows what a Torah scroll is, okay? And I take out the Torah scroll, and he's holding the Sefer Torah, and I said to him, it's hard for me to communicate why it is that someone like you who I've never met, right, I can still love, and that it would mean so much to me if you would consider how wonderful it could be, to be Jewish, to have Jewish children, etc. So I said, you have to ask yourself if that's important to you. If it's not important to you, so then let it go and move on. Guilt isn't good for anybody. But if it's really important to you, then before you move on and make this decision, take some time. Lots of people put off their marriage. So I said, look, I can't bear to watch this, so I'm going to walk out of the sanctuary. And I'll come back in half an hour, and you don't have to be here. And if you don't care about Judaism one way, and you think the whole thing's ridiculous, then just leave the Torah scroll on the floor. So I want you to know that if I come back to the sanctuary, I checked, there were no services in the next half hour. If I come back to the sanctuary and the Torah scroll's on the floor, I'm going to have to fast for 30 days. That's Jewish tradition. But I'm willing to do that, right? That's how much I care about you. If you can't put the Torah scroll on the floor, then that means that something's bugging you. You got to ask yourself what that is. What you do with that is up to you. Do not try this at home. Okay? I've never done this again. I came back to the synagogue. The Torah scroll was back in the ark. It was closed, okay? And this guy had gone. And I debated, should I call the father? Should I not call the father? So I didn't call. And I figured life will lead me to wherever it's supposed to lead me. And about 3 weeks later, I get a call, not from the father. He never called me. I don't know what happened there. But the boy actually called, and he ended up coming to Israel. He didn't marry this girl, and he's today living somewhere in Israel. That's another story. So you never know.
You're a gambling man.
Yeah. You never really know, but I do think that there are two issues that are critical. One of them is how we view our fellow human being. Essentially, what you're saying at the heart of these discussions is that someone has a different perspective, and you disagree with their perspective. That's a very difficult thing to say to somebody. It's especially difficult if you're saying it or sharing it or communicating it with someone you've never met. You can only disagree with someone, it's just an opinion, when you first respect where they're coming from. You have to really respect where a person's coming from, and they have to sense that you respect where they're coming from. Then you have a right to disagree with them. And I'll give you an example, okay? I hate the labels. I think labels are a terrible thing. I think we put ourselves into boxes. Are we Orthodox? Are we Reform? Are we Conservadox, right? Those labels didn't really exist in the same way 1,000 years ago. The word religious is a very difficult word. What does religious mean? Who do we define as religious? I would like to think that when you think a person is religious, you immediately assume that he never slanders his fellow human being. You immediately assume that he's so respectful of his parents. You immediately assume that when you run into such a person, this is a person you want to be around. I don't know if that's true. But okay, in Jewish tradition, by the way, to the best of my knowledge, you do not find in traditional sources the word religious, because to be able to judge the totality of a person, you just don't find that. You can judge an action. But okay, but let's assume for the moment that a person, is coming from a different perspective. So we'll use a label for the purpose of this discussion. Take the Reform movement. Now, the Reform movement came on the scene a couple hundred years ago, and they had very good intentions. right? The world had locked us up into our ghettos for almost 2,000 years. And in that process, we had developed a system of ethics, of love for our fellow human being that was to be modeled. And now the ghettos were opening up. We were able to own land. We were able to vote. We were able to be a part of society. So came along a group and said, let's join society. Let's share with them the beauty that we've discovered, the ethical world that could be. And in order to do that, let's assimilate into the world. Let's meet them in the boardroom, in the bedroom, everywhere. And let's be part of them. In fact, the original Reform movement actually had their rabbis taking off their kippot, because that way they weren't separate, but a part of society. They removed all mention of the land of Israel from their prayer books. They were vehemently against, by the way, the establishment of the State of Israel, because they did not want to see another Jewish ghetto be created. Let's be one, right? Imagine there are no peoples, right? John Lennon. Now that's a beautiful idea. And before you can disagree with it, which I do, you have to respect where it's coming from. That's beautiful. Once you respect where it's coming from, then you can disagree with it theologically. And by the way, that's the difference between a disagreement and an argument. So I think the same is true as individuals. Too often I've seen people who are so dogmatic about how they view Judaism, religion, tradition.
Let's not get personal.
Right? You know, and it comes off as such a judgment. In fact, sometimes, you know, you meet a guy, I've met students who, you know, became more involved and sort of deeper enmeshed in Jewish tradition, and sometimes they become very dogmatic, and you'll hear somebody talking to someone who's new to Judaism, and you have to take that person aside and say, you know, if you had met you 5 years ago, you wouldn't be a traditional Jew today. So that's a challenge. We have to learn how to let go a little, how to make it about sharing and not about convincing.
Rabbi, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Rabbi. Pleasure. A dear friend of mine, he was on the verge of marrying his non-Jewish girlfriend. And much to my shock, I couldn't believe it, he received almost no objections, no problems from any of his friends or his family. They all really strictly adhered to the Western philosophy of live and let live, or whatever makes you happy. And honestly, I couldn't do it. Maybe it's out of style, but I said I couldn't do it, and I would not go to the wedding. And not only would I not go to the wedding, but our friendship would never be the same. And we had discussions, and we had arguments, and we had all sorts of dialogue for a long time. And really, the whole thing, throughout the entire process, I can tell he wasn't really fighting with me. He was fighting with himself. And this went on for a while, and in the end, thank God, he ended up breaking up with his non-Jewish girlfriend. But what makes this story so special is that soon thereafter, he called me. He called me and he thanked me for disapproving. He thanked me for saying no, for standing up against him and really standing up for him. He was so happy. He was now married to a Jewish that he fell madly in love with, and for the rest of his life. Now you see, as a people, as a nation, it's time for us to stand up. It's time for us, as Rav Binny said, to stand for Jewish identity. Not necessarily fighting against everything, against assimilation, against intermarriage, fighting for the Jewish family, fighting for Jewish education and the Jewish identity, because our future depends on it. Shalom from Jerusalem.
Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu, Or Avinu, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu, Or Avinu, Or Avinu Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael 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 Chai. Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu, Or Avinu, Or Avinu Chai. Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu, Or Avinu, Or Avinu Chai. Look at how beautiful the Jewish people are! Woo! Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu, Or Avinu, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu, Or Avinu, Or Avinu Chai. Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael, Am Yisrael Chai. Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu, Or Avinu, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu, Or Avinu, Or Avinu Chai, Or Avinu Chai, Or